Hello, everyone. My name is Scott James, and welcome back to another Artist Chat. We're here with myself, Peter Mountford, and Anca Szilágyi. Did I say that right, Anca?
Yeah.
All right, good. And we are here talking to both of these two very accomplished and wonderful writers because each of them is a past winner of the LaSalle Storyteller Award through the Artist Trust. If you're a reader or a writer in the Seattle, state of Washington community, you've probably come across one of them in person or potentially their writing. Those of you who are not lucky enough to be in that community, I'm very excited to introduce you to each of them. If you're watching this podcast, it's likely that you're interested in the Artist Trust Award. And I will say the reason that we're talking to both of them right now is because, like I said, each of them won the award in the past. And right now, for the remainder of the month of August, everyone out there has an opportunity, if you're a writer in the state of Washington, to submit your own writing and potentially win the award yourself. So a little bit about the award. The LaSalle Storyteller Award through the Artist Trust is it's an unrestricted grant of $10,000 given to a Washington state artist engaged in storytelling through your artistic discipline. The 2017 award is going to recognize an outstanding literary artist working in fiction. So all you Washington State fiction writers, now is the time. You have a few more weeks to get your work in and see if you can be like Peter and Anca. After that plug, I'll tell you a little bit about who we're with here. So Anca Szilágyi is a Brooklynite living in Seattle. Her fiction appears in places that you've heard of, such as Gastronomica, Fairy Tale Review, Washington City Paper. Her nonfiction appears in other places that you've heard of, like the Los Angeles Review of Books, Electric Literature, Jewish in Seattle, and Kirkus. She is the recipient of many fellowships and awards, from Made at Hugo House, Jack Straw Cultural Center for Culture, and of course the Artist Trust. The Stranger hailed her as one of the fresh new faces in Seattle fiction, and her debut novel, Daughters of the Air, is forthcoming from Lanternfish Press this December. Welcome, Anca.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
Indeed. And Peter Mountford was born and raised in the other Washington, D.C., apart from spending 3 years in Sri Lanka in the early stages of the Sri Lankan Civil War. All right, might have to ask about that, Peter. After finishing his own studies in international relations in '99, he spent 2 years as the token liberal at a right-wing think tank. Fantastic.
Yeah.
For most of the time, he lived in Ecuador and wrote about Ecuador's economy. That was before he got his MFA at the University of Washington in 2006, and since then he's published 2 novels, one called A Young Man's Guide to Late Capitalism, and The Dismal Science. The Dismal Science was a finalist for the Washington State Book Award in Fiction and was named a New York Times Editor's Choice. Young Man's Guide to Late Capitalism won the 2012 Washington State Book Award in Fiction and was a finalist for the 2012 VCU Cable First Novelist Prize. His short work has appeared all over the place, and I'll list them, and including in the Boston Review, where he won second place in the 2007 contest judged by George Saunders. Amazing. He has been a fellow at Yaddo and Breadloaf, and if I had to list everything that Peter has accomplished, we would take up this entire podcast. So I will just leave it at saying he's currently the events curator at Hugo House, Seattle's Writing Center, where he also teaches, and he's on the faculty at the low residency MFA program at Sierra Nevada College and at the University of Washington. Peter, welcome to the Artist Chat.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've got 2 very accomplished folks here. And I'm just going to start out with the most basic question that I always wonder, and I think a lot of people wonder, but what got you into writing in the first place? Anca, let's start with you.
Well, I I was always that weird kid in the corner telling myself stories. I was just always interested in reading stories and making them up and just sort of going off into my imaginative world. So there was no, like, at times I thought about doing other practical things, but it always came back to writing.
Gotcha.
I think I have a similar kind of thing. Like, I just was always a storyteller. I was sort of lost in my daydreams from a young age. The real world seemed really depressing and lonely, so I would vacate the real world and disappear into my imagination. And I remember I had a daydream that was really elaborate when I think it was in 5th grade, and I ended up just sort of writing it down so I could keep track of all the pieces of it. So I don't know if you had anything like that, Anca. Did you?
Actually, yeah. So my grandfather was my first publisher. He gave me, a pencil and a notebook, and I went off and I wrote a story about these mice in search of magic cheese in Transylvania. And then he took my scribblings and he copied it out in his own block letters, and then took like my 2nd grade photo and pasted it to the outside of the booklets. I had my author photo. It was a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Do you still have that?
Yeah, is that in print still?
I hope my mom still has it somewhere. I know she has like filing cabinets full of stuff, so it's probably there somewhere.
I love that. Peter, that's kind of interesting when you talk about daydreams, and I've been so I'm going to follow that one up. I've been learning a lot about daydreams and flow state and things like that lately. So I'm curious, or just like the evolutionary importance of altered consciousness, not necessarily with substances, but just through creativity. So I'm curious kind of what role daydreams and any other kinds of flow states play in each of your creative processes.
I mean, I still, frankly, daydream fairly often. I do wonder if the periods of my life, like the period of time when I'm daydreaming a lot, if it suggests that I'm feeling bad about the real world and I'm trying to find an escape. I think that may be possible. But I don't know. I do think it's pretty important, obviously, for a writer to allow yourself to be lost inside of a make-believe world. I mean, that's what we do if we write fiction. There's a lot of time spent sort of deeply embedded within an imaginary world. And I think, it's funny because a lot of my writing so far has been, I think as literary fiction has been quite wedded to reality. Like I try to make it feel almost like nonfiction at times, even though it's made up. I mean, sometimes it's pretty unclear whether it's fiction or nonfiction on purpose. I bring in real people from history and so on, contemporary people who are still alive, and I don't change their names or anything. And so there's, kind of blurriness there on purpose. Anca's like the reverse. I mean, not the reverse, but there's definitely a lot of magical components in her writing. So I think that's, I would love to do that kind of writing. I love writers like that. I love like Kelly Link and Karen Russell and all those people. But I feel intimidated by magical realism of any kind. So, but I think maybe more now I'm becoming more engaged with just sort of plot and entertainment as a component of fiction, which takes it further away from reality. But I'm liking it more. I don't know. Yeah. If that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Anca, what about you?
Yeah, like Peter said, I have a more fantastical view of things, although not to sound too woo-woo, but like I don't see my work as fantasy in the terms of like there's no reality to this, but I look at like more emotional realities that come out in fantastical ways. And just trying to see like this idea of Kate Bernheimer has this idea of everyday magic, which can be applied to realistic fiction in terms of like the magic of strange interactions, or the body is strange. All people are shapeshifters, but also like taking magical moments sort of at face value, right, and just accepting that this is part of a reality.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I do spend a lot of time daydreaming. My first novel, I kind of just told myself the story over and over and over again, and like, you know, very slowly the details would occur to me, and sort of looking into the landscape of the, you know, the story is set in a real place, but kind of looking for those, what would I see like just around the corner? Like, what am I not physically seeing that I can sense is there?
Can I ask, when you say you told yourself the story again and again, do you mean like you almost verbally told yourself the story? Like it was in your head, or were you writing it down?
In my head a lot of the time. So there was a long period of time where I wasn't physically writing it and I was doing a lot of research, but I was telling myself the story as it formed. So, you know, at first it was very skeletal, but kind of as I would work out, well, why is this character this way? Why is that character that way? And once I decided on what that meant, then I would just sort of keep telling myself so that I wouldn't forget, but I wasn't ready to write it down yet.
That's smart. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds pretty fun. And I love the importance of daydreaming process. So as someone who does not write, you know, extended fiction or nonfiction for that matter, can you tell me something that I would be surprised about that's part of your writing routine?
Oh, I'm surprised. I think, I mean, I don't know if it's surprising. I read a lot of interviews with authors, so I hear them say a lot of us have a lot of similar experiences. And so I think, I mean, I sit, you know, in the same place and I just log hours. And some days, you know, it's pretty arduous and is not going well. And then some days it feels like it is going well. I mean, I think there's an extraordinary amount of waste. It's not waste. I would have to clarify that. It is, there's certainly, you're throwing away huge amounts of work, hours and hours and hours of work. I do that on a very regular basis. Months of work, years of work be thrown out. But I think that it's part of the process. You have to do that, or at least I do. I have to do that in order to get something good. And so I think that's sometimes surprising. And a lot of authors, sort of first-time authors, I think are alarmed when they discover how much time is often required before something starts to work well. And some things actually work really well quickly. And I think that's I found that with short stories a lot, for example, is that a short story that I'll just dash off in 4 days and it feels fantastic as I'm writing it, and then I'm done. That's often like the best story of the, you know, that 3-year period. Whereas the story that I worked on for 6 months on and off and revised and threw parts of it out and really worked on it heavily, those are sort of they can get a little bit better, but they're never gonna kind of blow the lid off of anything. And I've written probably 25, 30 short stories in my life that I was like intended to publish and sent out, and maybe half of them now have been published, but only like 3 of them are really good. And those ones are the ones that did not take long to write. They were not actually that hard to write. And that's a sort of a dirty secret, but it is true. And I think that's why trial and error is very valuable. You know, people revision is really valuable too. It's really, really important. But throwing stuff at the wall really quickly and sort of seeing what sticks is also, I think, a very good process for writers, for a lot of writers. I know there are writers that don't work that way, but it's uncomfortable because there's a lot of waste. But I think that's often what works best. And for me, at least, I don't know.
Yeah. Is that your experience, Anca?
Actually, I have a very similar experience with short stories. Some of them take years and years, and they seem to be a big struggle. And then I've noticed the common thread among the ones that I write in, say, a sitting, and then they turn out great. It's all voice driven. It's all, I heard a narrator, a first sentence, and I just follow the voice. And it's just sort of like you listen, you sort of, as the writer, you get out of the way and let the story tell itself. that doesn't happen very often, but I'm learning to always listen for that voice. And then, yeah, I can totally relate to writing quickly to see what sticks on the wall, like even for like a first draft of a novel. So like my first novel, I didn't do that, and it took years just to finish a first draft. So for my second novel, I decided a different approach. I was just going to write 1,500 words a day. It didn't matter how, crappy they were, until I had like 100 pages. And I was willing to throw out, most of it and just keep what I liked. And it was a lot of fun to do it that way. And just not think about it.
I do think that fun thing is also really important. I think I sort of forgot that with the book I was just working on, but I'm remembering it again. And it just, that if you're having fun as a writer, I think that the reader's more likely to be having fun when they're reading it. I think there's something truly crucial and real about that.
Yeah, I love that. That's literally the next question that I had written down.
Oh, really?
So yeah, let's do it. The question was, what's the most fun you're having as a writer right now? And it may or may not even be writing.
I think that for me, I'm working on this book that's kind of like a mystery and a thriller. And it's nothing like what I've written before, really. It's what they call upmarket, which is publishing speak for inclined to make money as opposed to get nice reviews.
Upmarket? That's the vocab for that one?
Isn't that horrible? Because it suggests that everything else is down market. But no, it's fun. I'm like actually just having fun. And it's a hoot. Like I don't want to stop writing. I miss dinner. I stay up late and it's not good. But I'm having a blast with it. And it preoccupies my days. And it's just, I'm writing it during the summer. So it feels sort of, I don't know, like somehow it feels summery and like, I don't know, it's just fun. The days are long. It's a lot of fun. It's the most fun I've had writing in many years, for sure.
Is that like you're a thriller mystery reader lifelong, and now you're like, no, I want to do this, or it's just sort of like, well, let's try a thriller?
I've always I've liked that genre a lot. Always a lot, and I identify with it a lot. And there were some light comparisons with my first two books to like Graham Greene and others who I think are kind of straddle the genre, non-genre boundary. But I just sort of went for it. And I love the film and TV that goes there, like Homeland or whatever. I mean, not always Homeland, it can be terrible, but there's aspects of the storytelling that are incredibly compelling and interesting, and I enjoy that. I like, deceit is wonderful to write. People who are lying or don't know what's going on, and yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, there's been so much done with like George Pelecanos' work across TV and whatnot. Anyway, Anca, what about you? What are you having fun doing right now?
So right now I'm working on promoting my book, but when I have time, fun things. I mean, no, that's fun too. I've been working on some essays about fruit. And I love research. So just sort of like an example of the kind of essay that's like out in the world right now is this essay called Dark Fruit, Cultural and History of the Plum. That's in the Los Angeles Review of Books. And I took family recipes, but also plums in literature and plums in like California farmers' views of plums and like what a waste of money they are. So I had so much fun with that. I decided to keep going with that. I just finished one on strawberries.
How long is the plum one? How long is that essay?
The plum one is long. It's like, I think it's like, no, it can't be 6,000 words. I don't know. It's a longer. It's a longer essay. The plums one, the strawberries one, I was like, I don't have that much to say about strawberries. I'm going to keep it under 1,000 words.
You got 6,000 words to say about plums, but only not that much about strawberries. All right, cool.
Yeah.
That's great. You should do ones on vegetables too. I ate kohlrabi yesterday. Have you had kohlrabi before?
No.
Nobody has. It's in the same family as I forget what it's called, but it's the family that is broccoli, cauliflower, also kale and all those things are all the same, basically the same species or something. And it's from that, and it's apparently really easy to grow, and it's delicious. It's not bitter at all. And it had, the greens are fantastic on top. And then the vegetable root thing itself is also delicious and kind of sweet, but not too sweet. And it's incredibly good. And I can't figure out why it's not more ubiquitous, since it's apparently easy to grow and it's like infinitely better than all of its cousins. It's because the world is not fair, I think.
That must be it. Well, I want. What is a plum or strawberry fact or story that I don't know that I should know? Anca.
Well, with the plums, I mentioned that farmers hate growing plums because they're so unpredictable, which is probably part of why I like them, is that you never, like, apples are really easy to regulate. Like, you know what you're going to get when you grow a Fuji. A great plum is like this rare gem, and like it can be sour or mealy, and then like you waste a lot of money. So that's something you may not know about plums. It's probably why in the supermarket, like, it's so hard to find a plum that's actually good. But strawberry.
Inconsistent, yeah.
There's this really weird folklore with strawberries where I think this is Christian folklore. If you lose a child and eat strawberries before St. John's Day, then Mary tells the ghost of your child that there's no portion of strawberries for him or her because your parent has eaten their portion.
Whoa. That is an elaborate one.
Yeah.
It's cool. That's fun. Okay, well, this makes me think a little bit, since we came together because both of you were Storyteller Award recipients. Both of you are very active in the writing community, and you've been recipient of other grants or awards or things like that. And Peter, you were talking a lot about the amount of writing that needs to be done that never really sees the light of day, or that doesn't get used. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of getting the Artist Trust Award when you did, and how that affected your process, but really just any kind of like that kind of support for what you do, or that kind of funding and income for what you do?
I think, I mean, writing literary fiction, it doesn't pay well for almost anyone. I mean, for story writers, for example, in the United States, I don't think there's a single one that makes a living off of writing short stories. So that's it. 0 people. George Saunders doesn't make a living from it. Lori Moore doesn't make a living from it. What's her name who won the Nobel Prize does, I think, just to make a living from it. What's her name? Alice Munro. She's in Canada, though. But anyway, but in literary fiction, even novels, it's pretty similar. It's incredibly rare. So it's really valuable for the world, I think, and it's these literary endeavors, but they're slow and difficult, and artists actually just need support. I mean, writers need support, especially these, with these genres, and these stories really matter. And so I just think it's, for me, like I hustle. I teach, as you mentioned, in several places. I also do manuscript consultations. I teach at Hugo House. I teach through Seattle Arts and Lectures WITS program. I apply for all these grants and fellowships. I work 50 hours a week at least. 20 hours of that is writing. And I make what would be a nice living in somewhere other than Seattle, but in Seattle it's like lower middle class, and that's it. Like it's a frantic hustle. And I think that an award like this really buys you time. Like I passed over some exhausting teaching things this summer precisely because I got this award in December. So I was able to say, like, I'm going to skip out on this 3-week thing where I would just be teaching all day, every day, and then just collapsing asleep at 6 p.m. And so, and instead of that, I'm writing 1,500 to 3,000 words a day. So I'm actually writing instead of teaching. I mean, it's literally happening right now. So, you know, this day, today, I will do that. Yesterday, I did that instead of teaching.
That's powerful.
And teaching's great, but it's like, you know, it's I will do lots of teaching. I will still do lots of teaching. I'm just not doing it this summer, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice. Anca?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, like an award like this one would allow someone to, you know, take off an extra, you know, teach that one less class, that one fewer class. And for me, I was starting to get really stressed out about not having anything saved away for a rainy day. So that was like the first thing that I did with it. But also, you know, I was able to go to the Netherlands to research my third novel, which I just had no idea when that was going to happen. And also it was like just a huge vote of confidence in my writing. And so that's like one of the things, after winning that award, it pushed me to keep sending out some manuscripts, my short story collection, because, you know, I had submitted short stories for the award. But also, you know, with this novel that's coming out, I thought, well, let me send it to one more place. And then that was, you know, that was the place that said yes. Mm-hmm. So that sort of, that boost of confidence to keep sending things out, because like I knew that there were people that believed in my work.
Very cool. Okay. So I've asked you a bunch of questions about your life and your work as a writer. What would you say? I'm sure a lot of other people ask you questions because it's not often that people meet a writer. So like what's your favorite misconception that people have about you as a writer? Or maybe not favorite, but what's one that that comes up frequently that maybe is amusing? Or is there one?
I do think that thing about how we make a living is a pretty common misconception. And I think I encounter that all the time. People say, you know, how are book sales going? Like, as if that's how I make a living.
A barometer, yeah.
You know, it's like I just publish the book, and then for years to come, I sit in my apartment writing, collecting royalty checks. And it's like, no, like nobody does that. Like, that's not how publishing works. It's not how writing works. It's, you know, you get an advance against royalties, and 99% of books do not clear their advance. So that's all the money you get. You get it about a year before your book comes out, a big check or a small check, and that's the end of it. And so, but I think that that's a big one, that people are often quite surprised that, you know, I mean, to be perfectly blunt, like I think I make between $10,000 and $15,000 a year from writing. And I have done so like average for the last 8 to 10 years or something. And then everything else that does like pays rent, if that. It doesn't even pay rent. And so everything else comes from something else, writing related. And so I think that's something that people are often surprised by. It's sort of depressing to them, but it's not depressing to me because I've been living it for a long time, so I'm kind of used to it. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah. What about you, Anca? Do you have misconceptions you encounter?
No, there's the idea that you're home, so you're not really working.
Right.
You know, so people want to make plans at odd times of the day and that sort of thing. You're like, well, no, actually, I'm at my job right now.
Right.
But I think I think when I tell people, oh, I got a book coming out, the first question is, oh, are you self-publishing? And then so kind of talking about like what those things, you know, the various meanings of, I think a lot of people don't know, like if you're just a reader, you're not like thinking about the, you know, the different ways that stories are coming out in the world. So just, you know, talking about that ecosystem and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's complicated, I guess. That stuff is very complicated.
Yeah. Speaking of, okay, so different ways that stories are coming out in the world. You know, both of you seem to be published what I would call widely in magazines, online, etc. What's your where do you sit with social media, the internet necessity of being out there as an author, interacting with fans, things like that? Are you do you enjoy that? Is that a challenge? How does that sit with you as part of the job that maybe it wasn't 20 years ago?
Oh, okay. Do you have a...
You know, I like it. I think it can be a big distraction, and so you have to kind of try to section off that part of your life to like some set time of day. But usually what I use Twitter for example, is like sharing books I like and like sentences that caught my attention, or like sharing a photo of something neat in Seattle. And I think if you're having fun with it, then it's worthwhile. And if it's just this drudgery, then everyone will know anyway. So that'd be something you would prefer to do. But it is addictive. And so I do think like you can end up interacting with people because it's fun longer than you intended. Kind of have to, you know, work at disconnecting as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that in some ways you can sort of peer into what were once these very people who are kind of seemed inaccessible authors I maybe admire, and I can follow them on Twitter and discover their quirkiness, and it's sort of entertaining, but I'm not sure if it's more than what you get from a gossip magazine, but like it's like the author version of that. And like, oh, I realized that like Joyce Carol Oates is having a hard time with her cat because it's sick or something. And that's amusing. I do think some of the conversations that can happen around really important issues that are in the culture, but are also in the culture of literature, are some of those things are great, that it's expedited and voices can be heard more clearly that were often silenced. And I think that's really great, that there's a kind of democratization of speech. But there's also obviously a lot of vitriol, and those forums, I think Facebook more than Twitter, surprisingly, Facebook is, I think, a place that is a repository for a lot of really horrible rage and anger and closed-mindedness. And so conversations can become pretty destructive pretty quickly. And I'm not sure precisely what value they're adding. And so that can be disheartening. And I think that authors get involved in those pretty often in one way or another, simply by having an opinion and stating it, which can create sort of a vortex of kind of going viral in the wrong way, or you know, they can just end up in a really horrible argument with a lot of people. And I think that's a little bit a shame. I mean, it's a shame that it's great that people are voicing themselves, but it's also a shame that people are also terrified of speaking as well at times. I've seen that recently. So yeah, just because there's so many trolls, I suppose.
Indeed. Okay. So being that obviously you're both living in Washington State, or you're both living in Seattle, is that true? Yeah. And what is like in your involvement kind of in the Seattle writing community, in the Washington State community, what's something that you feel like is happening right now that isn't isn't getting the recognition. It could be a person or a publication, or just some sort of, could even be a place, something in Seattle or the Washington writing community that you'd love to point people towards.
I don't know. It all seems so sort of immediate right now for me. Do you have a thought on that, Anca?
Well, I mean, just thinking about, Hugo House is obviously a community that people, if they're not familiar with, should plug into if they're fiction writers or any kind of literary writer. I teach there as well. But in terms of another writer people should know, I'll give a shout out to a friend of mine who I ran a reading series with for 4 years through Hollow Earth Radio. It's an internet radio station. And we always would highlight writers that we thought more people should know about. And so I think more people should know about my partner in that project, Corinne Manning. She's a fantastic short story writer and essayist. And she is, I think she's going to be big soon. I love her stories. They're just such, there's an intimate look at relationships and psychology and the human experience, which I guess all kind of sounds a little vague the way I'm describing it, but she has this great story called Professor M in Moss Magazine. Really, really funny story about a professor and her student and an inappropriate relationship in a really fresh way. So check her out, Corinne Manning.
All right, very cool.
I don't know if I still don't have anything. I just,
okay.
I mean, I live in Wallingford, the neighborhood of Wallingford, and it's not fiction related, but we have Open Books here, which is a poetry only bookstore, and it's really small. And I love reading poetry. I can't write poetry to save my life, but I read a lot of poetry, and it's just a really wonderful resource. And I think it's part of what we have in Seattle, which is a truly kind of book crazy literature, writing crazy place. People are really into it. We get, I saw Ta-Nehisi Coates speak on stage a year and a half ago or something, and he was at like the largest opera hall in the city, and it was sold out. It was totally sold out. It had been sold out for a long time. And he was just in conversation with somebody on stage, this writer in conversation with another writer on stage, and it just seemed completely bonkers that's the degree of kind of enthusiasm people have. I mean, yeah, so it's a sort of meandering answer, but.
Perfect. All right, Open Books. And what is the person's name, Anca?
Corinne Manning.
Corinne Manning. Good. Well, now I want to try something even slightly a little different. I know that both of you know each other and you work together. Is that accurate?
You work near each other.
In the periphery of each other. So you interact. It's not like you've just met on this interview here. But I'm curious if each of you wanted to, if you could ask the other person a question in this interview right now, what you would want to know about each other, whether as an author, or again, you don't have to hold it to author type questions like I am. But
what would I ask Anca about? I just read her book, which is coming, and it's really wonderful. And I actually sort of, I think we talked a bit about the process of that book. I would, I guess, ask about what's the next book, or you were mentioned going to Amsterdam, or I don't know.
Yeah, that's the third book. There's a second book that I'm going through a 9th revision on this summer. So to answer the question about the third book in the Netherlands, it's a sort of historic / I guess fantastical. I haven't decided yet exactly what it's going to look like, but it explores an artist from, an actual historical figure, a Dutch artist, and a fictional character that collaborates with him. And so I feel like I'm getting kind of superstitious about how much I talk about it because it's changing a lot.
But that's good. Yeah, you don't have to. I understand wanting to hold it close. Yeah.
Sure.
So have you been working on it for a while though?
I started working on it in about 2013.
Cool.
So wrote, like a shitty first draft. And then I did a lot of research. I love to research. So of course I spent a long time researching that actual historical figure and like painting techniques and like cultural associations, like idioms in the Netherlands. And then I got to go to the Netherlands, which was amazing. And I went to the hometown of this artist and I got to see all of his work and I saw it x-rayed. And so after that, I sort of like had to re-outline and rethink. And so that's where I am with that book.
Cool.
Fun. And is there a timeline on that one, or it's just seeing how it
goes? Yeah.
Fair enough. How about do you have a question for Peter?
Sure. What are you reading right now?
What? Oh my God, that's embarrassing. But I'm reading. I'm reading Lee Child. It's not embarrassing, but I am reading Lee Child. And I'm going to be reading more of those types of books, those really upmarket, very, the sentences. I was just looking at the sentences and the pacing was very surprising with his books. Because he, I thought, obviously the pacing is extremely fast in a sense, so that's the idea. But actually how he negotiates time is very slow. So there's like an opening scene that will take place over 15 minutes of the character's life, but it takes, 20, 30 pages. So he slows down time that much. In fact, the first 70 or 80 pages of this book takes place over about 7 or 8 hours. So it's really slowed down time. And there's just a lot of meticulous detail. And it's just interesting to see how he layers, he creates tension immediately and mystery, but clarity. There's enough clarity, you're not like confused. There's mystery though. And then he just jams on the brakes and there's a lot of summary. It's not all just in scene, which is the other thing I sort of assumed. There's a lot of summary. And so it's quite meticulous and slow in its pacing in a certain way, even though it's obviously very hard to put down. I mean, that's the whole way it's engineered, is to be almost impossible to put down. And I'm just sort of doing a survey of other writers from that ilk and their approach to managing information. Sounds very dull, but that's, a lot of what fiction writers do, as Anca knows. But like just that sort of techniques that are involved. I was at a family reunion recently and I tried to describe the way I was reading these books to a family member who's a reader, not a writer. And they just looked at me like, wow, you are murdering the pleasure of reading. And I was like, I'm sorry, but that's how we have to do it. We do an autopsy, like as a writer, you have to look at other people. At least I do. I look at it like, I want to dissect this thing and see how it works, how its machinery works. I don't read for pleasure in the way that I did before I was a writer, I can't read that way. I can't read that innocently. I have to be kind of pulling it apart as I'm reading, looking for the machinery pieces and how they move. And so that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
You used the phrase managing information. Do you mean that like when you write something, you think of it as managing information? You could begin with a book by just telling the reader the entire backstory of the main character, and that would take
30 pages, 40 pages, like they were born in this place, they went here, they had this relationship, they broke up, blah, blah, blah. And then the story starts, and that's probably a terrible idea. Not always, but it could be really boring. Or you could just do no backstory at all in the whole book. And then the reader never really learns anything about the character's past, which is interesting, but could be problematic in its own way. Managing information is all sorts of things, like what time of year is it? Where is this book set? What's the character's job? How many family members do they have? There's all this information that is, as an author, supposedly you know it all. But you don't want to just drop it on the reader's lap all at once. It's too much. And at the same time, you can withhold too much too, and the reader gets kind of disinterested or disengaged. And so there's a question of, when does information become pertinent, and how do you say it in a way that feels interesting and not simply because you had to whim. Like, I was like, I just feel like telling the reader right now, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but does the reader care? So, try and generate curiosity and then answer the question maybe, or something. But how they do that in genre fiction is quite different than in literary fiction. Literary fiction is much more permissive of large amounts of character information coming in fairly early in a book. In genre fiction, it's quite frowned upon that the information should trickle out over the course of hundreds of pages, and there should be less of it in general. Or it's implied, like their personality is implied by the way they operate within scene. So you can figure out information about them that way. But the real big stuff is withheld.
But I think you're also, for a thriller, don't you? You're controlling information in like a particular way, because like you're building. You want the reader to understand just enough right now, so that everything will add up, but it's still like that, that surprising thing at the end.
Totally. And it's like exactly like a mystery, actually. I mean, it operates exactly the same way, where you have a really big problem, and then there's all these gaps in information, and the character needs to locate the answers. And so they're hunting for the answers, and it's no good for the reader to know the answers before the character. They should figure it out simultaneously. Or even sometimes the character figures it out before the reader. Not long before the reader, but a little bit. They go like, there's like the cliffhanger ending of a chapter where they go like, and that's when she realized what was going on. And the reader's like, oh no, what was it? And you're like, you'll find out soon.
Yeah. Read the next chapter.
You really want to toy with the reader, then you, instead of resuming with the narration telling you what the answer was, you start the next chapter from a different point of view. And the reader's like, oh no, I don't get to find out the answer to the question. It's kind of fun. I don't know, I enjoy it.
That's, I never thought of it as that's just a fascinating way to think about it, but it totally makes sense. Of course, you're like Wizard of Ozing it. What how do you figure that out before you start? This will be for both of you. Do you, like, with the managing information, or what you're going to release, or how you're going to, is that something you try to figure out before you start writing, or does it just come out of the writing?
I don't know.
Is that even a fair question?
I think I don't figure it out beforehand. I figure out some things, but I also intuit it on the page as I'm writing. I like to leave a lot of room for intuition on the page. I don't plan as much as maybe I could or should. I don't know. I don't like planning that much. I like leaving a lot of it to spontaneity. I have a general plan, but it's pretty big picture. So then there's a lot of improvisation on the page, because I like that. I get more excited. The writing feels more alive to me that way. Do you plan meticulously, Anca?
I'm very intuitive and image driven. So usually, certainly for a first draft, I'm not going to have much of a plan, maybe something penciled out. But like, I know some writers like need to know the ending and then reverse engineer. And it's like this very scientific process, and then doesn't, that's how they enjoy doing it. But I like surprising myself in the writing process. And if that means having to change the structure of the story, then so be it.
Exactly.
Nice. Okay. Well, we are coming up to the end of our time here, so I'll close by just asking, tell me a little bit about where we should go to learn more about your work or what you've got out right now. And then if you have, let's just say that. Where do we go to find more about your work, and what would you point us to look at right now that that's out recently?
I have a website, petermountford.com, and I have the social media accounts, the usual ones. And I had a story out earlier this year in the Missouri Review called "You Have to Continue, You Have to Hurry," which I liked, and that was out in the previous issue of the Missouri Review. It's a sort of long story. 5,000 words maybe. And that's it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so my website is ancawrites.com, so you don't even have to know how to spell my last name. I think I also still have the domain impossiblysspelled.com. And so either way, that's where all the links to my work are. The last short story that I wrote that is online that I think is fun to read is called Don't Worry, in Moss. There's a link to it on my website, but it's also, it's in the current print volume 2 of Moss. It's kind of about these 2 really terrible tourists in Amsterdam. And
yeah, I like that.
Leave it at that.
I like that.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, Peter, Anca, I really appreciate you both making some time out of your writing days, and I'll put all the links to your websites and to some, if I can, to the work that you were talking about there down below. So everybody out there, if you want to read more or learn a little bit more about Peter and Anca, you can follow those links. And if you are another writer out there and you're checking this out, we encourage you, if you're another writer in Washington State, we do encourage you to submit your work. I'll put that link down below as well, and see if you as well could be a LaSalle Storyteller Award winner with the Artist Trust. Okay, thanks again, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.